I had driven 4 hours for closure. They had ordered $400 of appetizer. The hallway smelled like cedar polish and the inside of a leather menu. Brass sconces threw soft light onto carpet thick enough to swallow a heel. I could hear the laughter through the closed door of the private dining room before I touched the handle. It was the kind of laughter a long table makes when the joke has not yet reached the end of the table and the people closest to the speaker are already certain it will land. I stopped with my hand on the brass and let myself listen. The maitre d' came around the corner with a wine bucket and a folded napkin over his arm. He glanced at me, then at the door. "They're already seated, ma'am," he said quietly. "Family party. 17 in the walnut room." 17? I said. "Yes, ma'am." I had expected 2. My mother and my father at a corner table, awkward water glasses, 4 years of silence on a leather-bound menu. I had told my therapist on a Friday afternoon 2 weeks before that I was going for closure and not for reconciliation. She had said those were 2 very different rooms. I had not known until I touched the handle which one I was about to walk into. I let the maitre d' pass and I opened the door. There were 17 people at the long table. The room was hung with green wallpaper and a single brass chandelier that swayed in the air currents from the service door. The table was set for a wedding rehearsal, 3 forks per place, water and white and red, and on the table itself was the remainder of a meal already in motion. 2 seafood towers, picked half empty, the ice melting under their tiered plates, a platter of sliced wagyu the color of garnet, a bottle of Bordeaux with the label turned politely toward my father's seat, half empty in the cradle of a silver bucket. A spent oyster shell on the nearest platter had filled with melted ice and looked like the only quiet thing on the table. My father was at the head. He had a napkin tucked into his collar, the way men of his generation do when they think the joke is on their own tie. He saw me. He raised his glass. "You're paying, right?" he said. "Big shot, therapist." The room laughed. It was the kind of laughter that travels in only one direction. It went around the long table and stopped at the empty chair at the far end, against the wall, the chair children get at family dinners. My mother, halfway down on the right, half laughed and looked at her plate. My sister Megan giggled into her napkin like a woman who has been told to giggle on cue and has decided to make a small show of it. My Uncle Roger laughed loud and slow, the way he always laughed at my father's jokes. My cousin Brandon laughed with his mouth still full of the wagyu he had ordered. My Aunt Patty laughed because Roger had. Across the table, my brother Bryce did not lift his eyes from his plate. 4 years of silence, and the first words my father had spoken to me were a punchline. I did not say anything. I scanned the room once and found the open chair. I walked to it. I sat down. The chair was upholstered in green velvet and was set close enough to the wall that I had to slide it back 6 inches to fit my knees under the table. There was a folded napkin on the empty plate and a water glass already full. Someone had drunk from it. A waiter, very young, 24 perhaps, with a small notepad in his apron pocket, was at the side of the room next to a butler's tray. He had been watching the door the way a waiter watches a door when his manager has told him to be ready. He saw me sit. He saw that I was not laughing. He stepped over to my side of the table and bent slightly at the waist. "Can I bring you something, ma'am?" His name tag said Mateo. He had a small, careful voice. He had been told nothing about who I was. He was simply doing his job. "Could you come closer for a moment?" I said. He bent further down. I tilted my head and I spoke 6 words at his ear, quietly, in a voice no one else in the room could hear. He nodded once. He did not look at my father. He did not look at anyone else. He walked away. I picked up the napkin and laid it across my lap. I had decided in the parking lot what I was not going to do. I was not going to argue. I was not going to walk out the moment the punchline landed. I was not going to confront my father about Eunice, about the will, about the 4 years, about the parking lot in May of 2022. The 6 words to the waiter were the only ones I had left to decide. I had decided them on the drive between the hotel and the door. A spent oyster shell on the nearest platter had filled with melted ice. It was the only quiet thing on the table. To understand why a single line of 6 words at a waiter's ear had been the only ones I needed, you would have to know what I had spent 4 years building in the place I had built it. My office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building on Main Street in Whitewater, Wisconsin, above a hardware store that sold mostly bird feeders in the spring and salt in the winter. There was a sign on the street with my name on it, Aaron Caldwell, LCSW, Grief, Counseling for Children and Families. The sign was the size of a sheet of letter paper. The lettering was modest, The waiting room had 4 chairs and a basket of stuffed rabbits. The hardware store owner, a man named Mr. Berryman, who had lost his wife to a stroke 3 years before I rented the office above his, charged me $400 a month in rent and refused to raise it. We had an understanding that I would not raise the rent question, and he would not ask what I did up there with the children who came up the stairs after school with their backpacks. He had asked me once, in the first year, what kind of work it was. I had told him it was the work of helping children find the words for things they did not yet have words for. He had said, like my wife's flower beds. I had said, yes, like the flower beds. We had not discussed it again. On the Tuesday morning before I drove to Chicago, I had a 9 o'clock session with a boy named Theo. Theo was 9 years old. His father had died of pancreatic cancer in October, 6 months before. Theo's mother brought him every Tuesday and waited in the waiting room with a paperback and a thermos of tea. Theo and I sat on the floor in my office between 2 crayons and a stack of construction paper. Today, I said, I want to ask you to draw something for me. Okay. I want you to draw what grief feels like. He thought about it for almost a minute. He chose a red crayon. He drew a room. The room had 4 walls and a floor and a ceiling and a window. He outlined them carefully, the way a 9-year-old does when he wants the lines to be right. Then he put the crayon down and looked at the paper. There's no door, he said. I see that, I said. I didn't mean to forget the door. You didn't forget it. The door is not there yet. He nodded slowly. He picked the crayon back up. He did not draw the door. He drew a small chair in the middle of the room. He put the crayon down again. What's on the other side? I asked. Of where the door would be if there were a door. I don't know, he said. I haven't gotten there yet. That's all right, I said. We can stay in this room for a while. His mother walked him out at 10. He hugged me at the door, and his head reached the bottom of my collarbone. I sat down at the desk and held the drawing for a moment before I slid it into the folder I kept for his sessions. The folder was labeled in my own handwriting. I had labeled every folder I had ever opened in my own handwriting. The work I had built my life around was the work of sitting with someone in a room that did not have a door yet, without pretending it did. I did not have a theory of grief that I sold to families. I did not have a method. I did not have an Instagram. I had a chair, a basket of stuffed rabbits, a hardware store under my window, and $400 in rent. My family had spent 4 years calling that career her little hobby. My father had spent 4 years using the word therapist, the way other men use the word for someone they cannot pronounce. The last time I had heard him say the word before the soup was the word he had used in his punchline. I drove home through farm country at the end of that Tuesday. The condo was at the edge of a small subdivision off the county road. It was a 1-bedroom on a slab with a small backyard and a wooden fence I had stained myself the second summer. I had paid the mortgage off in 3 years by taking on as many clients as the practice could hold and living on rice and the vegetables from a neighbor's garden. The interior was simple: a kettle on the stove, a framed certificate from my Master of Social Work degree, dated 2013, hanging slightly crooked above the kitchen sink. The wall beside it held a single photograph in a birch frame. The photograph was of my grandmother Eunice at 90, the summer before she died. She was sitting on the dock at the cabin in northern Wisconsin in a blue cotton blouse and a wide straw hat. My hand was in hers. You could see only my arm in the photograph. The photographer, a neighbor named Doreen, had been told to keep the focus on Eunice. My grandmother was looking at me, not at the camera. Her eyes in the photograph had the kind of attention in them that my mother's eyes had never had. The look was not adoration. It was simply attention. The look of a person who had decided to know what she was looking at. Most people in my family would not have understood what I did for a living if I had explained it for a decade. My grandmother had understood the first time. On a Friday, 2 weeks before the dinner, I had a session with my own therapist, Dr. Whitman. I had been seeing her for 2.5 years. She did not advise. She asked questions. That afternoon, I told her about the email from Carl Voss. I told her I was thinking about going. She did not say whether I should. She asked me one question. What would you go for? She said. Closure, I said. Not reconciliation. Those are very different rooms, she said. I thought about that for several minutes. She did not interrupt. The clock on her wall was the only sound in the room. When I looked up, I said, I want to know which version of myself I'm going to be when I walk in. That's a good reason to go, she said. It is not a guarantee that you will like the answer. The thing the dinner at Mariner's Light was theoretically making amends for had happened in a reception hall in Cicero, Illinois, on a Saturday afternoon in May of 2022. My sister Megan and her husband Trey were christening their first child, a boy named Carter. The hall was rented for the day. There were perhaps 50 guests. Carter wore a christening gown that had been my grandmother Eunice's. My father had paid for the catering. My ex-husband Daniel had been invited. I had been divorced from Daniel for 7 months. The divorce had been my decision. Daniel had not done anything dramatic. He had simply, over the 4 years of our marriage, become a man who treated me with the casual contempt that the men in my family had treated the women in my family, and I had decided, on a Tuesday in March of 2021, that I was not going to spend the rest of my life politely accepting the thing my mother had politely accepted for 42 years. I had filed in June. The divorce had been final in October. My parents had treated the divorce as an embarrassment to be undone. My mother had told me on the phone twice that Daniel had not been so bad. My father had stopped speaking to me for 6 weeks after the filing. By the spring of 2022, when the baptism was scheduled, there had been a tense and partial peace in the family. Daniel had been invited because my mother had said, "He is still part of this family until you stop being stubborn." I had asked her not to seat him at the head table. She had seated him at the head table. The reception hall had long pine tables covered in white linen. There was a small 4-piece band that played jazz standards. The cake was lemon. A small child of one of the cousins, perhaps 3 years old, ran in circles around my chair, shrieking with the joy of being 3 at a party. Halfway through the dinner, my father stood at the head table with his champagne flute. He cleared his throat. The room quieted. The band lowered the volume of the song they were playing. "I want to make a small toast," my father said, "to family." The room raised their glasses. "To my daughter Megan and her husband Trey," he said, "for giving us our first grandson." Megan smiled. Trey nodded. "And," my father said, "to Daniel, the son we still claim." The room moved a little. Daniel looked down at his plate. He did not raise his glass. "May my other daughter," my father said, looking down the length of the table at me, "come to her senses." There is a kind of laughter at a long table that travels in only one direction. The laughter started near my father, at the head, and traveled down the table toward me. My Uncle Roger laughed loudly. My cousin Brandon laughed. My mother half laughed, the way she always half laughed when she did not want to commit but did not want to disagree. Megan giggled. The neighbors who had been invited did not laugh, but they did not say anything either. By the time the laughter reached the middle of the table, it had grown thinner. By the time it reached me at the far end, it was just my father's voice, holding the joke up like a glass that had not been broken. I set my wine glass down. My hand did not shake. I gathered my purse and my coat. I stood up. I walked the length of the long table without looking at my father and without looking at Daniel. I walked through the doors of the reception hall, across the polished foyer with the framed pictures of weddings on the walls, and out into the parking lot. It was a cool afternoon. The sky was the soft gray of a Midwestern spring. The trees behind the parking lot had small new leaves. I unlocked my car. Behind me, I heard the side door of the hall open. Trey jogged across the lot, breathing hard, his tie flapping over his shoulder. "Aaron," he said. "Come on, he was joking." I turned around. I looked at him. "He was not," I said. "He was. You know how he is." "I do," I said. "That is what I am leaving." "Don't make this about you," Trey said. "It's Megan's day." I got into the car. I closed the door. I started the engine. Trey stood in the parking lot for a moment with his hands hanging at his sides. He did not knock on the window. He turned around and walked back toward the hall. I watched him in the rearview mirror. Megan did not come out. That was the thing I learned that night. Who would and who would not? I drove the 3 hours back to Whitewater. I called nobody on the way. I got home, set my keys in the small ceramic dish by the door, hung up my dress, and ate a piece of toast standing at the kitchen counter. I went to bed at 9. I did not cry. The voicemail started 2 days later. My mother first, asking me to stop punishing the family. My father the day after that, asking me to act my age. Megan a week later, asking me to be the bigger person. I did not return any of them. I changed my parents' ringtone on my phone to silence. I changed Megan's to a single low chime. I did not block any number. I just did not return calls. By December of 2022, the calls had thinned. I spent that Christmas at my friend Renata's house in Madison. She made roast pork and roasted potatoes, and we drank 3 bottles of wine over the course of 2 evenings and watched old movies. She did not ask about my family. She knew the shape of the 4 months by then. She let me sit in her living room and be quiet. My grandmother Eunice called in March of 2023. She was 88 then. I had not spoken to her in 9 months. I had sent a Christmas card and she had sent one back. I was at the kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon with a cup of tea when the phone rang. I picked it up. I heard her voice. "Erin," she said. "It is your grandmother." "I know," I said. "I'm proud of you," she said. "For going quiet. Most of us never did." I did not say anything for a moment. I had not expected the sentence. I had expected concern or pleading or the careful indirection that women of her generation used when they wanted to ask a daughter or a granddaughter to come back to a family she had left. I had expected, on some level, the same conversation in a softer voice. I had not expected pride. "Thank you," I said. "I'm telling you," she said, "because nobody told me when it was my turn. And I never did. And I am 90 years old next year, and I am still paying for it." The line was quiet. I could hear her breathe. "Come up to the cabin in May," she said. "I want to take a picture with you, while I still look like myself." I went up in May. We sat on the dock. Doreen took the picture. It is the photograph on my kitchen wall. My grandmother died on the 8th of November, 2025. She was 91 years old. The call came at 6:15 in the evening from the nursing home in Madison, where she had been for the last 14 months. I was at my office, finishing notes. The nurse was a woman named Carolyn, whom I had spoken to several times. "She went quietly, Miss Caldwell," Carolyn said. "Around 5. She had asked for her radio at 4, and we put it on the classical station. She did not wake up after that." "Thank you," I said. "There is a family lawyer who would like you to call him tomorrow morning. His name is Anthony Wong. He is on Wisconsin Avenue. I will have the front desk give you his number." "Thank you," I said. I put the phone down. I sat at my desk for a long time. The light through the window was the long November light that comes in low between 4 and 5 and then collapses into dark. I had been on the phone with my grandmother 3 days earlier. She had told me that she was tired, but not unhappy. I had told her I loved her. She had said the same. The call had lasted 8 minutes. It was the last conversation we had. I called Anthony Wong's office in the morning. He was the family lawyer for the Caldwell side. He had drafted my grandmother's will in 2021, 4 years before her death. He told me the funeral would be on the 12th at the Catholic Church in Madison, where my grandmother had not attended in 40 years, but where her sister had been buried. He told me there would be a reading of the will the following week. He told me I was named in it. He did not tell me what for. I went to the funeral. I sat in the back row. My parents were in the front pew. Bryce nodded at me from across the aisle. Megan did not turn around. Daniel was not there because he was no longer family. My second cousin Andrea, my grandmother's brother's daughter's daughter, hugged me in the parking lot afterward. "She talked about you every Sunday," Andrea said. "I know," I said. I did not stay for the reception at the church hall. I drove 3 hours north to Whitewater, ate a piece of bread standing at the kitchen counter, and slept in my own bed that night. The reading of the will was on the 19th of November in Anthony Wong's office in Madison at 10 in the morning. I dialed in on speaker. I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad. Anthony's voice came through carefully. My father's voice came through near the speaker. My mother's a little further. Roger was there too, with Patty. Anthony read the will straight through with the formality of a man who had drafted it himself. The bulk of the estate, $420,000 in cash, and the family home valued at $640,000, was to be divided equally among Howard Caldwell, Roger Caldwell, and the heirs of the late Jonathan Caldwell. My grandmother, having outlived one of her 3 children. My cousin Brandon and his sister Leah were Jonathan's children. The home was to be sold within 12 months. Then Anthony's voice changed register. It became more careful. "There is a separately enumerated bequest," he said, "to Eunice Caldwell's granddaughter, Erin Caldwell." The line was quiet. "To my granddaughter, Erin Caldwell," Anthony read, "I leave the cabin at Lot 7 on Birch Inlet Road on Lake Manaman, together with the 2 acres of land on which it sits, and the savings account at First Wisconsin Federal in my name, balance as of the date of my death, which on file is $72,410. "Wait," my father said. "Excuse me, she left her the cabin?" "She left her the cabin," Anthony said. "And the savings account?" "That cabin was in the family for 50 years. "And it still is," Anthony said politely. "It is in the family. It is now in Erin's name." There was a longer silence. I heard my mother whisper something to my father that I could not make out. "There is one more matter," Anthony continued. Before the estate can close, all named beneficiaries must sign a one-page no-contest acknowledgement, which is standard. The acknowledgement simply confirms that each beneficiary has received the terms of the will and is not contesting them. Without all signatures, the estate cannot move into final distribution. I will be sending those acknowledgements to all parties this week. All parties, my father repeated. All parties, Anthony said, including Aaron. Including Aaron. Then she'd better sign it, my father said. He laughed once. If she wants any of us at the cabin this summer. I hung up before Anthony could say anything else. I sat at my kitchen table. The notepad in front of me had a single line on it, cabin and savings account. I had not known about either one. I had not known my grandmother owned a savings account separately from the rest of her financial life. I had not known the cabin was hers to leave to anyone. She had spoken of it for 30 years as something that belonged to the family. She had never said it belonged to her. I made a cup of tea. I sat at the table for an hour. Then I opened my laptop and I looked up probate attorneys in Madison. I made a list of 4. I called the first one on the list. Her assistant put me on the calendar for the following Wednesday. Her name was Priya Khatri. She was 44 years old. Her office was in a brick building on the east side of Madison, on the 2nd floor above a coffee shop. She had thick black hair pulled back at her neck and tortoiseshell reading glasses that she wore on a chain around her neck. She read the will twice in front of me. She did not move while she read. When she was done, she set the will down and folded her hands and looked at me over the top of her glasses. You don't need their permission for anything, she said. You need to give them yours to close the estate. That is your only piece of leverage. It is not large, but until you sign that acknowledgement, your father cannot inherit a dollar. How long can I hold off? As long as you want, she said. There is no statutory deadline for that acknowledgement. The estate sits open. The estate pays fees while it sits open. Your father is 67. He has waited his whole life for his inheritance. He will wait. When should I sign it? When you are ready, she said. Not a minute before, and not in a room with any of them. Not at a dinner, not at a holiday, not after a phone call you did not want to take. In my office, on my desk. I told her I understood. I paid her a retainer of $5,000 and I drove back to Whitewater. For 4 months, the acknowledgement sat in my drawer at home. The original Priya had given me to keep with my records. I did not sign it. I waited. I went to work. I drove up to Madison for sessions with Priya every 6 weeks. We did not talk about the acknowledgement most of those times. We talked about her work. We talked about my work. She had 3 children. Her oldest was applying to college. She asked once whether I had any siblings. I told her 2, and she did not ask anything else. On the 24th of March, 2026, I drove up to Madison. I sat in Priya's office. I took the acknowledgement out of my bag. I signed it. Priya notarized it. She filed it with the county clerk the next morning. The estate began to move toward closing. Howard did not know. The pressure built in the way family pressure always builds, through other people. My mother sent a Christmas card in December of 2025, 3 weeks after Eunice's funeral. The card was a hallmark with a robin on the cover. Inside, she had written, in her round, careful handwriting, I miss you. So does your father. Please come home for Christmas. The cabin is sitting empty. I did not respond. I spent Christmas at Renata's house in Madison again. We drank wine and watched the same movies we had watched in 2022. We did not discuss the card. In January, my sister sent a text message. She had not texted me directly in 3 years. She had used my cousins as intermediaries, sending messages through Andrea, who would forward them to me and I would not respond. The text in January came from Megan herself. It said, Mom's not doing well. She misses you. We all just want you back. Can we please talk? I read it twice. The phone went back into my bag. I did not respond. The text was followed by a second one a week later. Aaron, I am asking you to think about Mom. She is 65 years old. She has not seen you in 4 years. She talks about you every day. I did not respond. I knew exactly what tone my mother used when she talked about me to my sister. I had heard it for 38 years. In February, Roger sent a forwarded email through Brandon, which Brandon sent to me directly. The email had been originally written by my mother and was a long list of family events I had missed. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary, Trey's promotion to manager, Carter starting kindergarten. The list ran to 23 items. I read 3 items and closed the email. In March, a card arrived in the mail from my Aunt Patty. It was a sympathy card, 3 months late, on the occasion of Eunice's death. Patty had written, I know you and your grandmother were close. I hope you can find your way back to us, the way she would have wanted. I put the card in a drawer. On the 3rd of April, an email arrived from an address I did not recognize. The subject line was an old man's request. The sender was Carl Voss. I had not heard his name in 20 years. I remembered him only because my father had taken him on a fishing trip when I was 11, and Carl had given me a $5 bill on the way home. The email was 3 paragraphs. It was warm without being saccharine. It said that Carl had known my father since 1976 and that they had been roommates in college. It said that he had been thinking about me for a long time. It said that he was not asking for anything except a dinner. He had a favorite restaurant in Chicago, a seafood place called Mariner's Light in the Loop. He thought it would be a good neutral place. He thought my parents and I should sit down at a table together for the first time in 4 years and see whether anything was possible. I read the email 3 times. I forwarded it to Priya. I called her the next morning. "He's a friend of my father's," I said. I assumed. "He's writing on his own. I don't think my father told him to write it." "It doesn't matter," she said. "Anyone who reaches out to you on your father's behalf is your father's intermediary, regardless of their own intention. They do not have to know they are being used. I'm going to go." She was quiet for a moment. "Tell me why." "For closure," I said. "Not reconciliation." "Those are different rooms," she said. "That's what my therapist said." "Your therapist is correct. I would add this. If you are going to a dinner with your father at a restaurant of his choosing, do not sign anything they put in front of you. Do not take the pen if they offer it. Do not agree to a follow-up meeting. If anyone hands you paper, slide it back without reading it." "Understood. And one more thing." Her voice softened slightly. "You owe them nothing tonight. Not the bill, not the gratitude, not the apology. Nothing. If you find yourself reaching for any of those things, sit on your hands." "I will." I made a reservation for 1 at the Loop Marriott for the night of the dinner. I told Mr. Berryman I would be out of the office for 2 days. I asked Mr. Berryman to water the plant in the waiting room. He said he would. I packed a small overnight bag on the Friday morning, an iron gray dress on a hanger, low heels, a silver chain my grandmother had given me when I was 16. I put the manila envelope of Eunice's photographs on the passenger seat of the Subaru. I locked the door. I drove. The drive from Whitewater to Chicago is 290 miles down the interstate, through farm country, into the suburbs, and finally into the city. I made it in 4 hours and 10 minutes. I stopped once at a gas station in Janesville for coffee and a granola bar I did not eat. I did not turn the radio on. I drove with my grandmother's silver ring loose on my 3rd finger, the ring that had fallen toward my knuckle 100 times in 5 months because I had not yet had it sized. I kept catching it with my thumb to keep it on. My grandmother had been dead for 5 months. The ring kept moving down the finger. I thought, on that drive, about every dinner I had ever been to with my father at the head of a table. There were perhaps 1,000 of them. The Sunday dinners of my childhood, the Thanksgivings when my mother roasted a turkey that nobody had asked for, the graduations and the engagements and the baby showers and the holidays. My father had always sat at the head. He had always made the toasts had always landed where he aimed them. The room had always laughed. I had laughed for the first 18 years. I thought about the day I had stopped laughing. It had been an afternoon in the summer of my junior year of college. I had been home for a week. My father had told a story at the dinner table about a neighbor whose husband had cheated on her and how the woman had let herself go since. He had landed the joke. The table had laughed. I had not. My mother had glanced at me. My father had said, "What, no smile, Aaron?" I had said, "I did not find it funny." My father had said, "You used to be fun." I had not said anything else. The pattern had taken almost 20 years after that to become 4 years of silence. I checked into the Loop Marriott at 4. The room was on the 18th floor with a view of the river. I hung the dress in the closet. I sat on the bed and looked at the carpet for a while. I called the front desk and asked them to send up a pot of tea, which they did, and I drank a cup of it standing at the window watching the boats on the river. I had been preparing for this dinner since I was 12 years old. I had not known what it would be called. The dinner had simply been the next dinner in a long line of dinners. The thing that had changed was that I had finally let myself understand that I had been the food my father had been serving to the table for 39 years. I had been the Wagyu, the lobster, the $500 wine. I had been the entertainment. I had been the punchline. I had been the bill at the end of the meal that my mother had picked up because she did not know how to say no to him. I was not going to be the food tonight. I dressed at 6. I brushed my hair back at the nape of my neck and pinned it. I put on the silver chain my grandmother had given me. I put on the iron gray dress. I checked my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The mirror returned the face of a 39-year-old woman with my grandmother's eyes and my grandmother's mouth and my own father's jaw, which I had never been able to do anything about. I said to the mirror, "You do not owe them the explanation." I walked 4 blocks to the restaurant. The April air in Chicago was sharp at the corners. The restaurant was on a side street off Wacker. The awning was navy. The brass lettering said Mariner's Light. The doorman opened the door for me. The host greeted me with a small bow. He told me the Caldwell party was in the Walnut Room. "They're already seated, ma'am," he said. "Are they?" I said. I stepped into the small interior hallway. The carpet was thick. The walls were paneled. The laughter through the closed door of the Walnut Room reached me before I touched the handle. I stopped in the bathroom on the way past, washed my hands in cold water, and looked at my reflection a second time. I thought of my grandmother on the phone in March of 2023. "Most of us never did," she had said. I dried my hands. I walked back into the hallway. The maitre d' came around the corner with a wine bucket and a folded napkin over his arm. I had been standing there for 30 seconds with my hand near the brass handle. I put my hand on the brass. I breathed once. I pushed open the door. A small bowl of seafood bisque arrived at my place 15 minutes after the waiter walked away from my chair. The waiter set it down. He set down a small plate of crackers next to it. He stepped back. The bisque was the color of a winter sunset, light orange and pale, with a single sprig of dill in the middle. I picked up the spoon. I ate half of it. It was good. I did not eat the other half. Around the table, the meal continued. My father told a story about a golf trip. My Uncle Roger told a story about a kitchen renovation his wife had insisted on. My cousin Brandon told a story about a colleague at his finance firm who had been promoted for no reason. My mother said almost nothing. She arranged her napkin twice. Megan and Trey ate in small, careful bites. Bryce did not lift his head once. Halfway through my soup, my father broke off the golf story and looked down the table at me. "Soup, Aaron," he said. "At a steakhouse?" The table looked at me. I lifted my water glass. "It is what I wanted," I said. "You always did know how to make a moment about yourself." I did not respond. I lifted the spoon and set it back in the bowl. The waiter at the side of the room, watching the door of the service kitchen, did not look at me. Across the table, Bryce's eyes met mine for 1 second and slid away to the Wagyu platter. My father moved on. He started a new story about a man at his old company. The table laughed at the appropriate places. The chandelier moved a little. 10 minutes later, the waiter returned. He was carrying a slim black leather tray. Inside the tray were 17 black billfolds, each closed, each with a small white check inside it. He stopped at the door of the room. He looked at the maitre d', who had appeared at the door of the service kitchen and was watching from there. The maitre d' gave him a small nod. The waiter began to place the billfolds on the table. He did not announce them. He did not say a word. He set the first one in front of my father. He set the second in front of my mother. He moved around the table quietly in order. He set Bryce's billfold in front of Bryce. He set Heather's in front of Heather. He set Megan's in front of Megan and Trey's in front of Trey. He set Roger's in front of Roger and Patty's in front of Patty. He set Brandon's in front of Brandon. He set the rest of them one by one in front of the cousins and the in-laws whose names I did not know any longer. He set the 17th billfold, the smallest of them, in front of me. My father looked down at his billfold. He opened it. He looked at the check inside it. He looked back up at the waiter. "What is this?" he said. "Separate checks, sir," the waiter said. "As requested." "By whom?" The waiter looked at me. He said nothing. He did not gesture. He did not nod. He simply looked at me and let his silence answer the question. My father's eyes followed the waiter's. The smirk was gone. I noticed that first. It had been there for 90 minutes. It had been there for the 4 years I had not been in a room with him. It had been there in the parking lot of my niece's baptism. It had been there in every story he had ever told at a long table. The smirk left his face. His face became the face of a 67-year-old man who had ordered a $500 bottle of wine he was about to discover was on his check alone. Around the table, the others opened their billfolds. Brandon's Wagyu sat on Brandon's check, $612 for 2 portions and the upgrade. Roger's Lobster Tower sat on Roger's check, $440. Patty's small portion of the second tower sat on Patty's check, $90. My mother's portion was the smallest of the family, $38 for a soup and a piece of bread and a glass of house white. Bryce's was $82 for a steak he had ordered medium and barely touched. Megan's was $140. Trey's was $160. The other cousins were various amounts, all in the hundreds. My father's check, His alone, with the $500 bottle of wine on it and his own porterhouse, was $812. My check was $14.50 for the soup. I had ordered the water with the meal. The water was complimentary. I looked at the check. I took the small pen out of the billfold. I signed the check. I took a $5 bill out of my wallet and laid it on the leather tray for the waiter. I closed the billfold. I stood up. My father was still looking at his check. He had not yet said anything. His face had gone through 3 small movements, the way a face does when a man is choosing between 4 reactions and trying to find the one that will not embarrass him. He had not landed on one. "Aaron," my mother said very quietly, "what is happening?" "I am leaving," I said. "Good night." I gathered my handbag from the back of the chair. I walked the length of the long table toward the door of the private dining room. I looked once on the way past at Bryce. Bryce lifted his eyes. He nodded, almost invisibly. I nodded back. I did not look at my father. I did not look at Megan. I did not look at my mother. I walked out into the carpeted hallway. The door of the private dining room did not close behind me right away. I could hear my father's voice rising on the other side, asking with a tightness in it I had not heard before, "Can you go get the manager? This is unacceptable." The maitre d', who had stepped past me in the hallway, did not turn around. He walked toward the front of the restaurant. I walked the other way, toward the side door that led to the alley in the street. In the alley, the April air came down sharp off the river. The brass lettering of Mariner's Light was visible on the awning from the side. I turned my collar up. I walked the 4 blocks back to the hotel. I had been told for 39 years that walking out of a room was the dramatic move. That night, I learned that walking out of a room was simply the next thing to do. The phone began to vibrate in my coat pocket 2 blocks from the restaurant. I did not take it out. By the time I got to the lobby of the Marriott, it had vibrated 4 times. I rode the elevator to the 18th floor in silence. The elevator was empty. The mirror inside it showed the face of a 39-year-old woman in an iron gray dress with the smallest amount of makeup left on her mouth. The face looked, in the mirror, almost calm. In the room, I hung the dress in the closet. I sat on the bed and took the phone out of my coat pocket. The screen said 9 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 2 text messages, all from my father. I did not open the voicemails. I did not read the text messages. I set the phone on the dresser face down. I ordered tea from room service. The same woman who had brought up the tea at 4 came back at 9. She set the tray on the small round table and asked if I needed anything else. I told her I did not. She wished me a good evening. She left. The phone vibrated 3 more times while I drank the tea. I let it vibrate. I called Priya in the morning at 9 after I had checked out of the hotel and was sitting in the parking garage in the Subaru with the engine off. "How are you?" she said. "I am fine." "Tell me what happened," I told her. She did not interrupt. I told her about the 17 people in the room and the Wagyu and the wine and the soup. I told her about the 6 words. I told her about the 17 separate checks. I told her about my father's face when his check landed in front of him. I told her that he had asked the waiter, who had requested the split, and that the waiter had let his silence answer. "That is the version of you I had hoped for," she said when I was done. "There is something I would like you to do." "Tell me." "Please send my father a courtesy copy of the time-stamped acknowledgement, the one I signed in March. No commentary, no accompanying letter, just the acknowledgement with the file stamp visible." "You want him to know it has been on file?" "Yes." "He will call me." "I assume so." "He will not get me. I will not return the call." "I assume that too." "I will send it this afternoon." "Thank you," I said. I drove home. I stopped once, in Janesville, at the same gas station as before, for a different coffee. The drive felt different from the drive down. I did not know how to describe the difference at the time. Later, I would describe it to Dr. Whitman as the difference between driving toward a question and driving away from an answer. Priya sent the courtesy copy that afternoon. My father called her 4 times the next morning. She did not return the calls. She sent him a 1-line email at noon. "I represent your daughter and cannot speak with you. Please direct all communication through me." He did not reply. He did not call again. For 3 weeks, the family was quiet. Megan did not text. My mother did not call. Roger did not forward emails. Patty did not send another card. Brandon did not write. The silence was the same silence that had existed for 4 years. The difference was that I had a piece of paper now that explained why. On the 28th of April, a 4-page letter arrived in the mail at my office. The envelope was thick. The return address was my parents' house in the suburbs of Chicago. The handwriting on the envelope was my father's. The certified mail receipt was inside the envelope. He had paid the extra fee to make sure I had signed for it. I read the letter at my desk on the Monday morning after I had received it. It was 4 pages on his old yellow legal paper, in blue ballpoint, in the handwriting I had been reading on birthday cards for 39 years. He had typed nothing. He had written the entire letter by hand. The first page accused me of destroying the family by walking out of the baptism in 2022. The second page accused me of selfishness for hiring my own attorney to handle the will. The third page accused me of cruelty for letting my grandmother's estate sit open for 5 months. He used the word selfish 11 times. The fourth page asked me to come home for Mother's Day, which was that Sunday, and to bring an apology. He mentioned the cabin 3 times. He mentioned my grandmother never. I read the letter once. I folded it. I put it back in its envelope. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the drawer where I kept the things I had chosen to keep without displaying, and I placed the envelope on top of the manila folder where Theo's drawings lived. I closed the drawer. I had 3 sessions that afternoon. The first was a 10-year-old whose mother had died in February. The second was Theo, on his off day, because his mother had asked for an extra session before a school event he was anxious about. The third was a 14-year-old whose grandfather had died in March. I sat with each of them in turn. I did not think about my father once. Megan called on the first Wednesday of May at 7 in the evening. I was at my kitchen table eating a small bowl of pasta. The phone rang. The screen said her name. I looked at it for 2 rings. I answered on the third. "Hi," I said. "Aaron," she said. "Please." She was crying already. She had not been able to wait for the small talk. I held the phone slightly away from my ear. "I'm here," I said. "Can we just go back to how we used to be?" I set my fork down. I looked at the photograph of my grandmother on the kitchen wall. The kettle was not on. The condo was quiet. The only sound was Megan's breathing on the other end of the line. "We were never how you remember it," I said. "That's not fair." "It is the most fair thing I have ever said to you." She cried for a long time. The call ran 11 minutes. She told me she missed me. She told me she had not understood what was happening at the baptism in 2022. She told me she had been trying to keep the peace. She told me she had a son now who was almost 4 and who did not know who I was. She told me that she was sorry for what Dad had done at the Lobster dinner, but that Dad was Dad and that I knew that. I let her talk. I did not interrupt. I did not soothe her. I did not promise her anything. When she had stopped crying, I said, "I am not closed. I am not open either. I am here." "What does that mean?" "It means I am not going to a holiday. I am not going to a baptism. I am not going to a Sunday dinner. If you would like to write me a letter, I will read it. If you would like to call me on a Wednesday evening, I will pick up. I will not pretend with you. I will not pretend the 4 years did not happen. I will not pretend that what Dad said at the dinner was a joke." "That is not how families work, Aaron." "It is how this family is going to work with me." She hung up, frustrated. I sat at the table for a long time afterward, the pasta cold on the plate. I put the phone face down. I made a cup of tea. The kettle whistled. I turned off the burner. I let the kettle cool. I had cried twice in my life as an adult. Once in March of 2023 when my grandmother had called me on the phone and told me she was proud of me. Once in the parking lot of the reception hall in May of 2022 after Trey had walked away. I did not cry that night. I was past crying. Bryce's note arrived a week later. It was a small envelope, hand-addressed in his careful left-handed script. The note was on plain blue paper, 4 sentences long. "Aaron, I am sorry. I did not know they were going to do that. I should have said something at the dinner, and I did not. I am sorry." I read the note 3 times. I sat with it for an hour. I wrote him back the next morning. My note ran 4 lines. "Bryce, I received your note. I appreciate it. I will not be at family gatherings. My door is not closed. Aaron." I sent it. He did not respond right away. He did not need to. The hardest part of those weeks was not the calls and not the letter from my father and not the conversation with Megan. The hardest part was a Thursday night, near the end of May, when I stood in front of the photograph of my grandmother on the kitchen wall and let myself cry for the first time since 2023. The crying was not for the family at the dinner. It was for the family I had spent 39 years inventing in my head. The version of my father who would have stood at the head of the long table and toasted me, his daughter, the one who had built a small, important practice for grieving children in a small, important town. The version of my mother who would have known to seat me in the middle of the table at the baptism, near the band, where I could have heard the music, The version of Megan who would have walked out into the parking lot with me in 2022 and would have sat with me on the curb until I was ready to drive home. None of those people existed. None of them had ever existed. The grief of accepting that the people who raised me were never going to become the people I needed was not the same as the grief of losing them. It was older and slower. It had been sitting in my chest, in different sizes, since I was 12 years old. I cried for 10 minutes. I washed my face. I went to bed. The kettle was still warm in the morning when I came out for tea. I drove to the cabin for the first time as the owner on the third Saturday in May. The Subaru was loaded with 2 cardboard boxes of books, a small toolbox, 3 of my grandmother's old wool sweaters that Anthony had sent me from the funeral home in November and which I had been keeping in a closet, the manila envelope of photographs I had carried in the passenger seat to Chicago and back, and a cooler with food for 3 days. The keys to the cabin were in a small brown paper envelope with my grandmother's writing on it. Birch Inlet, East Door. She had labeled the keys at some point in the last 2 years of her life, knowing she would not be the one to use them again. The drive north from Whitewater to the cabin was 290 miles, almost exactly the same distance I had driven in the opposite direction 6 weeks earlier. The country opened up the further north I went. The trees were the spring green of new leaves. The sky widened. The Subaru turned off the county highway onto a gravel road that ran along the edge of a state forest. The road climbed a small ridge. The cabin came into view through a stand of birches, a small clapboard structure with a green metal roof and a porch facing east. I had been to the cabin 100 times as a child. I had been on the porch and the dock and the small living room with the wood stove. I had never opened the door. My grandmother had always opened the door. I parked the Subaru. I sat for a moment in the driver's seat. I picked up the brown paper envelope. I took out the key. I walked up the 3 steps to the porch. I unlocked the door. The cabin smelled of cedar and lake water. The furniture was the same furniture I remembered from when I was a child. A small dining table, 4 ladder-back chairs, my grandmother's reading chair by the east window, a wood stove with a cast-iron kettle on top of it. The light through the east window was the kind of light only an east window gives in May. I set the cooler on the kitchen counter. I opened the windows. I stood for a long time in the middle of the room. I walked down to the dock. The dock had been built in the 1960s and had been repaired piece by piece across the decades. The boards were a mix of pressure-treated lumber from different eras. 2 of them, near the end, were missing. I had noticed the missing boards every summer of my childhood. My grandmother had said every summer that she was going to get to them soon. I went back up to the cabin and opened the small shed at the side. There was a toolbox. There was a small stack of replacement boards behind the door, left over from the last time my grandmother had repaired a different section. I measured the gap. I cut a board with the handsaw because there was no power saw in the shed. I drilled 4 pilot holes and set 4 screws. I stood on the new board to test it. It held. I did not call anyone. I did not photograph the dock. The thing I had fixed was the thing only I needed fixed. That night I sat in my grandmother's reading chair under the east window with a cup of tea. The notebook I had brought up with me was open on my lap. The inside cover was empty. I wrote 1 line in my own hand. The bill they were trying to hand me was never mine to pay. I closed the notebook. I sat for a long time with my eyes closed. The wind off the lake moved the curtains. The water made the small sound of water against pylons. The cabin was 1,100 square feet of a thing my grandmother had carried for 60 years and had given me at the end of her life. The thing she had given me was not the cabin. The cabin was the place where the thing she had given me could live. The week after I got back to Whitewater, I had my Tuesday session with Theo. He drew again. He used a blue crayon this time. He drew the same room. This time the room had a door, and the door was open. "I figured out what's on the other side," he said. "Tell me." "It's a porch, with my dad's old chair. Nobody's in it, but it's there." I let the silence sit. I did not fill it. He put the crayon down and looked at the drawing for a moment. "That's a porch," I said. "That's a good place for it to be." "I think so too." His mother walked him out at 10. He hugged me at the door. I sat at the desk and slid the drawing into his folder. I labeled the folder, in my own handwriting, with the date of the session. I closed the drawer. A 9-year-old taught me that month that the rooms in our heads stay the shape we give them. They open when we are ready, and not a minute earlier. I went up to the cabin again the weekend after. I sat on the dock until midnight. On the board I had cut and screwed in, and watched the moon move across the water. If you have ever sat at a table where the bill was about to be slid in your direction, by someone who never asked you what you ordered. You already know what I am going to say. You do not have to argue. You do not have to make a scene. You do not have to teach them anything they have spent 30 years refusing to learn. You do not have to explain yourself. You do not have to walk in with a speech in your pocket. You do not have to bring receipts to the dinner. You do not have to bring an attorney to the dinner. You only have to know which portion is actually yours. The portion you ordered, the portion you ate, the $14 soup, the glass of water, the chair against the wall. You can pay for that. You should pay for that. You should pay for it without complaint and with a tip for the person who was kind to you in the room. The rest of the bill is not yours. It has never been yours. It will never be yours. The Wagyu was ordered by someone who can pay for the Wagyu. The wine was chosen by someone who can pay for the wine. The 17 seats around the long table were filled by 17 adults who can pay for what they ordered. If they cannot, that is the conversation they need to have with the person at the head of the table, not with the person against the wall. Take care of yourself. Order what you actually want. Eat half of it if half is what you need. Leave a $5 bill for the waiter. Sign your check. And if the room turns its head and laughs at the smallness of what you ordered, finish your soup, stand up, walk out into your own night, and drive home. The cabin is small. The dock has one new board on the end. The window over the kitchen sink looks east, and the light in the morning is the kind of light you do not have to perform for. There is a chair by the window with my grandmother's blanket on it. There is a kettle on the stove. There is a notebook on the table with one line on the inside cover. The bill they were trying to hand me was never mine to pay. That is one truth. The other truth is that you are allowed to leave the table.